There's no introduction. We're ready to get started. Let's give an applause and welcome to Margaret Davis.
Well, thank you all for waiting. That horrible traffic accident in the tunnel kept me in my car for 2 hours, and so I'm so glad to be here. Back at Spring Hill College, of course, and to be here with you tonight. My talk is going to be about finding faith through image, seeing God in the works of Gerard, Manley, Hopkins, and Flannery. Since the beginning of recorded history, human beings have inherently known that there is something larger than themselves, some being that has power, creative and wonderful and terrible all at once. And they seek ways to know this being and try to find images that might represent that God power to help them apprehend its nature. This is from Paradise Lost. The angel Raphael has come to earth to speak to the first created human being, and Adam asked him for more information about his maker and how he might love and serve him. And Raphael responds here: "How shall I relate to human sense the secrets of another world, perhaps not lawful to reveal? Yet for thy good this is dispensed, and what surmounts the reach of human sense I shall delineate so, by likening spiritual to corporal forms, as may express them best. Though what if earth be but the shadow of heaven, and things therein each to the other like, more than on earth is thought?" A contemporary critic, Dennis Patrick Slattery, in discussing Flannery O'Connor's vision, says much the same thing in plainer English. "The imaginative writer," he says, "explores how an individual learns to focus his moral vision on the visible creation in order to apprehend, if even for an instant, the invisible presence of the Creator by means of grace." We will explore how two Christian and Catholic writers, the 19th century Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins and the 20th century fiction writer Flannery O'Connor, made use of such corporal images in profound but vastly different ways to lift the veil and reveal something of the Creator God whom they worshipped. But first, a little background about images. While pre-Christian cultures tended to revere the natural world, the images they contrived to represent the deity drew less from the natural world than from images more like themselves, portrayed in forms which often showed power and aggression. And I'm going to show you a few of those. The Mayans in South America honored over 150 gods, but their most revered god was this one called Itzam, a fierce-looking combination of male and female characteristics. The Aztecs honored many gods as well, but their favorite was this one. I'll see if I can pronounce it. Huitzilopochtli. He was the patron god of war and sacrifice, and his powerful aspect was heightened by the use of large bird feathers and noisemakers. Hindus also, and you may recognize this one, honored many gods as well, and they used human forms heightened with multiple arms and decorated with ornaments and fancy clothes to represent the deity that they worshipped. And we know all about the ancient Greeks. The Greeks and Romans did not distort the human form as some other cultures did when they derived their pantheon of gods, but on the other hand, they heightened them by giving their gods powers denied to humans and fantasizing them as extraordinarily beautiful, strong, and wise. And so here we see a statue of the Greek god, Zeus, depicted as extra tall and forbidding and sporting multiple horns, suggesting power, and the corresponding Roman god, Jupiter, in a similar pose holding a scepter. Most of these gods had exceptionally beautiful faces and perfectly formed bodies, such as Apollo is shown here. On the other hand, Israelites, fathers of the Christian faith, knew well from the second commandment that God could not be represented by any image or form. They took the opposite extreme by not even pronouncing the name of God and honoring God as altogether spirit. And they honored him. He was represented by a cube in their tabernacle called the Holy of Holies, which they were forbidden to enter. Christians honored this understanding of God as well. and continue to reject the notion of representing God through an image, although Michelangelo veered from that, of course. He represented God as a bearded old man when he was creating Adam. This is in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Instead, Christians tend to take the advice of Milton in seeking ways to understand God and God's ways, not through images of the deity itself, but by using corporal forms to express who God is and how God operates. They well might be following the advice of one of my favorite poets, Emily Dickinson. She has this wonderful little poem, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. The truth must dazzle gradually, lest every man be blind." So, instead of looking into the sun, we search for images we know to help us understand the truth that blazes too brightly for us to behold directly. Of course, the universal symbol of Christianity is the cross, not an image, but a physical representation of Jesus' sacrificial death for humankind. The stark reminder of Jesus' suffering has many forms, and its shape often reflects the culture of those who revere it. There are so many different kinds of crosses. The basic shapes are Greek, which has two bars that are of equal size, and let me go back here, and tall, and Latin, the Latin cross, and the Greek cross, and the tall cross, which is shaped like the letter T. And then here's another one that was important. One of the oldest forms of crosses is the Jerusalem cross. This was a cross claimed by the Crusaders in the 11th century. Even though they didn't originate it, they claimed it. And they printed it on the flag when Jerusalem was captured and ruled briefly by Europeans. There are various interpretations of this cross. Some say that the four crosses in the bars represent the four corners of the world where Christ should be spread. And then there's some idea that the five crosses altogether represent the five wounds of Christ. Another ancient cross is this interesting one, the Maltese cross. It was also claimed and used by Crusaders by a group of military monks who called themselves the Knights Hospitaller. And these were men who served as physicians on the battlefield, and they cared for Christian pilgrims who were staying in hospices. Today, this cross is frequently used by humanitarian groups because the 8 arms on this cross represent the qualities of those who are servant people, such as faith, mercy, endurance, truth, those kinds of things. And so it's used today by various humanitarian groups such as hospitals and police and fire departments. And so you see there one used by a fire department. The major cross of the Catholic Church is the crucifix. And this cross shows Christ hanging on the cross as a continuous reminder of his death. The cross that leads to our discussion today is this one that I love. Oh, wait a minute. This one that I love. And this is the Celtic cross. This cross was fashioned in the early Middle Ages by Christian missionaries to Ireland and Britain and Wales, some say by St. Patrick. And this shape incorporates the Latin cross superimposed over a nimbus. The original inhabitants of those lands, the Celts, were nature lovers and worshippers, favoring the sun as all-powerful. Some historians believe that this cross incorporates that sun image to draw non-believers into understanding that Christ is supreme over all of creation. I saw this great high cross in Iona, Scotland, several years ago. It was an arresting experience for a believer. Understanding the Celtic view of creation and God as creator leads to an examination of the way the Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins viewed the natural world and its agency in understanding God and God's ways. Celts found inspiration for their images from nature in the majestic poetry of the of the Old Testament. And here are some of the verses that you'll see in that many, but just 2 I chose. A shoot will come out from the stock of Jesse, and from his roots a branch will bear fruit. And the second one that we all know. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. J. Philip Newell, in the Book of Creation, describes how, in the Celtic tradition, and I quote, God is understood as speaking through the two books of the Bible and through creation. Because the Creator speaks in and through all that has been created, the creation becomes the grand volume of God's utterance. That is to say, essentially, all life is an expression of God. To learn of God, therefore, is to listen to the heart of life, especially as it is revealed in the natural world. End of quote. To Celtic worshippers, the most holy place was the sanctuary of earth, sea, and sky. Hopkins spent 3 years in northern Wales and became enamored with the Welsh countryside and the rhythms of Welsh poetry. And the Celtic conception of the eternal seeping through the physical was kin to his Jesuit understanding of seeing God in all things. As Jerome Bump, a Hopkins scholar, says, Hopkins reads the book of nature and holds up its images as ways of knowing God. So we're going to look at some of Hopkins' poems. The first one I want us to look at is, here's Hopkins. The picture didn't come out full. God's Grandeur. Every Hopkins lover knows this poem. It's wonderful. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, oh morning, the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breasts and with bright wings. I knew a painter once who, every time he saw a painting that he thought was wonderful, he would say, bright wings. This notion of charged, and I put a few of these pieces in italics. They're not Hopkins italics, they're mine because I wanted you to look at them in particular. But that word charged in the first line, it can be both an electrical current and a sense of calling. But in either case, creation here is shot through with God's glory and benevolence, both in the sense of flaming out like shook foil and bubbling up like oil from pressed olives. Hopkins recognized the dark side of human nature and mankind's wanton use of God's good gifts, but he did not despair because, he said, the Spirit of God is deep in the natural world. The dearest freshness deep down things can never be used up. The dark night is always followed by the luminous dawn because of the continuous caretaking of the Holy Ghost. The poem ends with what I think are the 4 most beautiful lines in all of poetry. And though the last lights off the black west went, oh morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and bright wings. Here we find the image of a dove hovering over the bent, and I think it's both spherical and bent. It's both things. A hen, brooding as a mother hen, covering her little ones with wings of protection and love and even salvation. The bird imagery was important to Celtic Christians. Newell explains how bird imagery was used to represent the soul of Christ. The ability of birds to ship rapidly from air to earth or from sea to air makes them powerful images of the communion between heaven and earth. He goes further to quote the book of Job, "Ask the creatures, they will tell you." Hopkins capitalizes on this image in a powerful way in this next poem, The Windhover. The Windhover has a subtitle, To Christ Our Lord, and he claimed this was the best thing I ever wrote. The Windhover is a kestrel, the smallest, lowest form of a falcon, and in this poem, Hopkins contemplates this bird as a splendid but faint copy of Christ as servant and king, sufferer and victor. So here's that poem, a little bit longer. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dappled dawn-drawn falcon in his riding of the rolling level underneath him steady air, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy. Then off forth on swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend. The hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind. My heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing. Brute beauty and valor and act, O air, pride plume, here buckle. And the fire that breaks from thee, then, a billion times told more lovelier, more dangerous. O my chevalier, no wonder of it, sheer plod makes cloud down Cillian shine, and blue bleak embers, oh my dear, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion. The first 6 lines of this sonnet describe the majesty of the falcon in the paradoxical terms of medieval French chivalry. It is mignon, which is both darling and servant, and dauphin, both heir apparent and not yet king. The poet stands in awe of the beauty, power, and majesty of this bird. The soaring, sweeping flight of the bird is seen against the push of the high wind, mastering flight and inhuman achievement. The last 6 lines give us the lesson we gain from this image of the majestic bird. The falcon descends in a burst of beauty, speed, and fire. The poet visions this descent as a buckle, both a giving in and a fastening, an intentional descent that is brave, beautiful, and dangerous. The bird becomes his chevalier, his knight, in his self-sacrificial plunge to earth. The farming images in the last line suggest that as the plow must break and turn the ground for planting and new life, so the bird must be broken for life to come from his suffering. The flashing fire becomes blue bleak embers, signs of the dying coals, and the gash from the fall produces an outburst of gold vermilion, a rich red flow connoting Christ's blood. Here, bruising and breaking of the beautiful brings ecstasy. The image of the splendid bird then becomes a faint copy of the splendor of Christ, achieved through his suffering and death. Though there are many more references from nature and Hopkins' poetry that exhibit his faith in Christ, for the sake of time, I'll just show you one more. We could stay all night and read these poems if it were up to me. But this poem is one that finds beauty in disparate images, in places that do not automatically suggest God in the world. And this one is pied beauty. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire-cold chestnut balls, finches' wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, and plow, for all trades their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how. With swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. Here we see image piled upon image of dappled things, creatures and activities that suggest flux, change, commonness, from the smallness of a finch's wings to the plowed farmer's field. All things counter-original, spare, strange, suggest a God of great variety and delight in the myriad ways of the world. But here it is evident, as Jerome Bunt aptly states, that nature is more than a veil for the transcendent God. For Hopkins, it seems to actually share in the presence, the being of God. The last line turns a noun into a verb to define God as more than creator. God is a nurturing progenitor, eternally beautiful, good, and present. I'd like to close this section on Hopkins' imagery with these last lines from his first official poem, The Deutschland. The Wreck of the Deutschland. This poem is based on a historical event in which 5 German nuns in exile from their homeland were passengers on a ship that ran aground in the Thames in a wild sea, and all 5 nuns were drowned. Hopkins' superior asked him to write a poem that would help to make sense of the death of these nuns and the loss to the Christian community. So he conceives this poem. He conceives the last nun who is dying and going under the waves to call out, "Oh Christ, Christ, come quickly," as she seeks beneath the sea. After a long meditation on the possible meanings of the deaths, Hopkins inquires of Jesu, "Is the shipwreck then a harvest? Does tempest carry the grain for thee?" He muses, "Is Jesus calling the nuns home? And do the nuns' death ring out a clarion call to England to return to the faith?" The poem ends with this breathtaking pileup of majestic language. I love those first 2 lines. "Let him Easter in us, be a dayspring to the dimness of us, be a crimson crescented east, more brightening her rare dear Britain as his reign rolls. Pride, rose, prince, hero of us, high priest, our heart's chariot's horse fire, our thoughts, chivalrous throngs, Lord." When I study Hopkins, I have to get out my OED, that book that takes you all the way back to the beginning of the words in the English language, to look up words that I never heard of. And I find sometimes that no one else ever heard of them either, because Hopkins made them up. But he made nouns out of verbs and verbs out of nouns. He used archaic expressions, and he coined words to fit his intent. And sometimes he piled them up into all near possible constructions, dense packed phrases. Here in the first line, he makes a verb out of Christ's resurrection day. Let him Easter in us, making of Easter Sunday a continuing, holy, and active presence that takes place within the human heart. Dayspring, my OED tells me, is the medieval word for dawn, and it fits us both as both the beautiful image of the eternal morning for believers, as well as the meter and alliteration of the line. The next line describes the dayspring as blazing with glory in his use of another coined word. Here Hopkins adds a syllable to the familiar crested to make crescented. This powerful image of radiant splendor crowning the break of day ushers the nuns into eternity. The syntax of the last 2 lines is so tortured that I found them hard to unpack. But the pervading message here is that of a kingly and loving Lord, both welcoming the nuns home and residing within the earthling in the present. So now we'll move to Flannery. Flannery O'Connor shared Hopkins' strong Catholic faith and passion for expressing that faith through imaginative writing. But after those 2 commonalities, this female 20th century American writer could hardly be more different from that of the 19th century classical British poet. O'Connor grew up in Milledgeville, Georgia, and spent most of her life there. And her fiction is set in southern backwoods Georgia, portraying common folk who speak in the vernacular of the uneducated rural South. O'Connor, in her letters and essays, repeatedly makes her intentions clear. And clearly there are other ways to read her work, or they wouldn't have become so popular everywhere. But she has something in mind that she wants to say. In her book of essays, Mystery and Manners, O'Connor discusses the role of the Catholic writer, and I quote, "When fiction is made according to its nature, it should reinforce our sense of the supernatural by grounding it in concrete, observable reality. If the Catholic writer hopes to reveal mysteries, he will have to do it by describing truthfully what he sees from where he is." So, like Hopkins, O'Connor draws her images for finding faith from the world she knows. And she says, "This physical, sensible world is good because it proceeds from a divine source. The artist penetrates the concrete world in order to find at its depths the image of its source, the image of ultimate reality." O'Connor's approach to this world, however, is quite different from that of Hopkins. While his images are drawn largely from the natural world and express the Godhead directly and profoundly in luminous language, hers are more like negative photographs, dark, indistinct, and counter to beauty, drawn from the human world more than the world of nature. O'Connor's images need to be exposed to light to have meaning. Approaching the profound questions of ultimate reality through the back door, she creates characters who are unattractive men, women, and children, distorted in both body and spirit, physically and psychically. Abnormal people you don't like very much. O'Connor calls them freaks, grotesqueries, and she has a very good reason for drawing her characters this way, and I quote, "The writer will be interested in possibility rather than in probability. Her characters will be forced out to meet evil and grace and act on a trust beyond themselves, whether they know very clearly what it is they act upon or not. The kind of writer I'm describing will use the concrete in a more drastic way, the way of distortion. In other words, her characters are ruder, meaner, more ignoble than most people we know. Freakish people." She continues, "To be able to recognize a freak, you have to have some conception of the whole man, one who has been formed in the image and likeness of God. It is when the freak can be sensed as a figure for our essential displacement that he attains some depth in literature. Ultimately, however, these freakish, flawed characters, these fallen humans, become images chosen to lead the reader to understanding God's gracious ability for transformation." O'Connor makes her intent plain. She says, and here's a picture of her on her steps in her farm in Milledgeville, Georgia, with her beloved peacocks. She had peacocks running all over her farm, I understand. And she had lupus, and she was very sick much of her life, her later life, and so you see the crutches there. But she says, "My subject in fiction is the action of grace in territory held largely by the devil." So rather than approach her subject to the action of grace in a straightforward manner, O'Connor distorts characters and situations in order, as she states, to jar the reader into some kind of emotional recognition of spiritual truth. Her distortion of reality acts as an instrument. Exaggeration has a purpose, she says. This is not the kind of distortion that destroys, she claims. It is the kind that reveals, or should reveal. So we'll look at her first story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. Now here's some of you laughing, so I think you've already read this story. And that's the one that's anthologized in all of the books that we teach. So most people who go to Spring Hill College have read this story. A story that is probably the most well-known is A Good Man is Hard to Find. We follow a backwoods Georgia family on a trip to Florida. Father, mother, 3 children, and a gregarious, controlling grandmother who lives by platitudes and stereotypes in the back seat of a car giving directions. The grandmother dresses for the trip in a navy blue straw hat with violets on the brim, white organdy collar and cuffs, and a purple spray of violets filled with sachet pinned to her neckline. The narrator says, "In case of accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once that she was a lady." She thinks of herself as the epitome of good people. The family stops for lunch at Red Sammy's famous barbecue, and they find out that a criminal labeled the Misfit has escaped prison. The grandmother and Red Sammy agree that a good man is hard to find and everything is going terrible. The grandmother badgers the family into taking a side trip to a fantasized southern plantation home because she has delusions of a failed southern grandeur. And while on a dirt road, the grandmother's concealed cat jumps out of her valise, jumps onto the back of her son driving the car, and he wrecks the car, and they land up in a ditch on the side of the road. While they're sitting in the ditch, the Misfit and his pals come along in a big black, battered, hearse-like automobile. They stop their car and confront the family with their guns. The grandmother recognizes the Misfit and shouts it out, and the Misfit says, "It would have been better for all of you, lady, if you hadn't recognized me." The grandmother begins to bargain for her life. "Listen," she screams, "I know you're a good man. You don't look like you have common blood. I know you must come from nice people." After the Misfit sends his pals to the woods to shoot the rest of the family, he has a conversation with the grandmother about his conflicted past. And she responds, "If you would pray, Jesus would help you." "Yes'm," he responds. "Jesus was the only one that ever raised the dead, and he shouldn't have done it. He'd thrown everything off balance. If he did what he said, then it's nothing for you to do but throw away everything and follow him. And if he didn't, then it's nothing for you to do but enjoy the few minutes you got left the best way you can. By killing somebody, or burning down their house, or doing some other meanness to him." The grandmother becomes confused. Her verities about good people are becoming distorted, and she mumbles dizzily, "Maybe he didn't raise the dead?" The Misfit warms to the subject. He continues, "I wasn't there, so I can't say he didn't. I wished I had have been there," he said, hitting the ground with his fist. "It ain't right I wasn't there, because if I had have been there, I would have known. Listen, lady, if I had have been there, I would have known, and it wouldn't be like I am now." His voice seemed about to crack, and the grandmother's head cleared for an instant. She saw the man's face twisted close to her own as if he were going to cry, and she murmured, "Why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children." She reached out and touched him on the shoulder. The Misfit sprang back as if a snake had bitten him and shot her 3 times through the chest. Then he put his gun down on the ground and took off his glasses and began to clean them. The story ends with his pal Bobby Lee saying, "Some fun." "Shut up, Bobby Lee," the Misfit said. "It's no real pleasure in life." Imagine you're wondering how this violent story in any way delivers an image leading to faith. Just as O'Connor said, we readers need to be jarred to recognize the spiritual moment. In all her stories that I have read, there comes a climactic moment when characters are exposed to some ultimate truth about themselves, an opportunity for an epiphany, an internal recognition of their need for grace. The most freakish character tends to be the agent for opening the other to this grace. Characters do not always respond to this gracious moment, but there's always the opportunity. Here I think we can see that moment, how that moment works for the grandmother, through the agency of the Misfit. She has always felt that she is good, superior to common people. After she hears the Misfit's honest but confused claims about Jesus and sees his internal confusion about the life he leads now, she is moved in a way that allows to drop her superficial notion of who is good people and murmur, "Why, you're one of my own babies. You're one of my own children." Grace brings her to recognize that they are equal members of the human family. And the Misfit? The O'Connor claims in a letter about this story that the misfit too is touched by grace when the grandmother recognizes him as her child. She writes, "His shooting her is a recoil, a horror at her humanness. But after he's done it and cleaned his glasses, the grace is worked in him, and he pronounces his judgment. She would have been a good woman if he had been there every moment of her life." In another place, O'Connor calls the misfit a prophet malgré lui, the French word for a prophet in spite of himself. Some might call the misfit an ironic Christ figure, one who in some ways resembles Christ but acts in opposition to him. O'Connor says not, that the misfit is an agent of grace, the image of one who transmits some understanding of God's grace, albeit totally unaware of what he is doing. Another story that offers unlovable characters doing despicable things to each other is this one, and I have a hard time saying the title, but it's her title, so I have to do it. It's called The Artificial Nigger. This tale features a grandfather, Mr. Head. He's described as having a long tube-like face, long rounded open jaw, and a long depressed nose. Mr. Head is guardian of Nelson, his grandson, a youthful mirror image of the grandfather. Mr. Head believes himself in possession of ancient wisdom, and his moral mission is to initiate his grandson into manhood by a trip to the city of Atlanta. This journey, however, has no purpose of growth, learning, or entertainment. Its only intention is to teach Nelson a negative lesson, that the city is an evil place and he must rely only on his grandfather for guidance and wisdom. However, from the moment they leave the train station in the country, the trip becomes a descent into hell. The city is a dark place of evil where they lose their way and travel in circles. Mr. Head has an aversion to people of color. He calls them niggers, and 10-year-old Nelson has never seen one. So the grandfather must educate this boy as to their otherness and inferiority. But the pair continues to run into Negroes who seem confident and know their way around the city. And this experience confounds Mr. Head and makes him more determined than ever to teach Nelson to respect him alone. He hides from Nelson while the boy takes a nap on the street, and when Nelson wakes up and runs away looking for him, in fright, he knocks down an elderly woman with a bag of groceries. The policeman comes up and Mr. Head says, "I never seen him before." Thereafter, alienated from each other, Nelson and Mr. Head wander about in confusion and darkness. Mr. Head finally wails at a fat man approaching, "I'm lost and can't find my way, and me and this boy have got to catch this train and I can't find the station. Oh God, I'm lost. Oh, help me, God, I'm lost." A few yards down the road, Mr. Head and Nelson come upon a figure, something like this one. And I'm quoting O'Connor's description here. The plastic figure of a Negro sitting bent over a low yellow brick fence that curved around a wide lawn. The Negro was about Nelson's size and he was pitched forward at an unsteady angle because the putty that held him to the wall had cracked. One of his eyes was entirely white and he held a piece of brown watermelon. He was meant to look happy because his mouth was stretched up at the corners, but the chipped eye and the angle he was cocked at gave him a wild look of misery instead. Mr. Head breathed, "An artificial nigger." O'Connor goes on. The two of them stood there with their necks forward at almost the same angle, and their shoulders curved in almost exactly the same way, and their hands trembled identically in their pockets. Mr. Head looked like an ancient child, and Nelson like a miniature old man. They stood gazing at the artificial Negro as if they were faced with some great mystery, some monument to another's victory that brought them together in their common defeat. They could both feel it dissolving their differences like an action of mercy. After this, the pair makes its way to the train station and then home to a scene of beauty and grace, much unlike the one that they had left. The moon, restored to its full splendor, sprang from a cloud and flooded the clearing with light. The grass shivered gently in shades of silver. The sky was hung with gigantic white clouds, illuminated like lanterns. The next paragraph describes Mr. Head's epiphany. He stood very still and felt the action of mercy touch him again, but this time he knew that there were no words in the world that could name it. He understood that it grew out of agony, which is not denied to any man and which is given in strange ways to children. He understood it was all a man could carry to death to give his Maker, and suddenly he burned with shame that he had so little of it to take with him. He stood appalled, judging himself with the thoroughness of God, while the action of mercy covered his pride like a flame and consumed him. So what does the image of the broken yard argument, how does it, the artificial nigger here, represented in spiritual terms, how might this image work to provoke such a change in Mr. Head and his grandson? Critics have wondered about this for years and years. O'Connor states elsewhere that the statue represents the Negro's suffering for us all, but critics vary widely in interpreting this image. It's most commonly treated as a representation of Christ or the Incarnation, because of the way it works out in the story, or the inhabited cross, or an agent of grace like the crucifix, or a kind of scapegoat. Others find it a sign of sinful humanity's spiritual inadequacy, or a figure that represents the similarities and connections of Nelson and Mr. Head. One secular scholar even goes so far as to state that to make the statue an emblem of grace is asking too much of a long ornament in Georgia. Clearly, the arc of the story, though, turns on the Head's confrontation with this image, whatever it represents, and the narrator makes plain the old man's response to it. Mr. Head now saw that no sin was too monstrous for him to claim as his own, and since God loved in proportion as he forgave, he felt ready at that instant to enter paradise. The author ironically creates an image of restoration and transcendence out of a broken statue of a black man that becomes the flawed nature of all humankind in search of God, the soul imbued with fevers burning in the psyche. The sudden realization of the pair that they are partners of a sort with this cracked representative of a debased person opens them to a kind of revelation impossible to conceive sooner. Most readers would agree that the notion of grace is a mystery that baffles the senses. But rather than to try to decode the mystery, O'Connor seeks to flesh it out into some kind of credible understanding through not so subtle allegory, to translate the unknowable into something the senses can apprehend, and through using the despised other as an agent of grace, O'Connor is able to pierce into Mr. Head's most cogent fears. As one critic states, sorrow has twisted all three bodies out of shape, chiseled away difference in race and years to form one ageless figure of hardship. The chastened white man and boy see their need for rescue in the artificial version of the black man they help to oppress. In these two stories, as in most of her fiction, O'Connor treats the subject of grace ironically, portraying it usually in its absence. Her character's search for truth has been unwitting only implicit, and this truth is depicted negatively through the eyes of self-satisfied hypocrites. I'm going to close with this last story of with the last story that O'Connor wrote. Actually, she finished it from the hospital bed shortly before she died at the age of 39. This final story shifts dramatically to portray the presence of grace in a recognizable form, an icon of Jesus, and its protagonist is on a conscious search for meaning. This story is Parker's Back. It's also populated with unattractive characters. We meet O.E. Parker, a young man whose body is literally covered with tattoos of all designs. A red and blue eagle perched on a cannon on his hand. Above that, a serpent coiled about a shield. Then there are hearts and hands of cards. A tiger and a panther adorned his shoulders. A cobra coiled about his chest. Hawks flew on his thighs, and Elizabeth II and Philip were over his stomach and liver. When he was 14, Parker had seen a man in a carnival whose body was covered with what seemed to him a single intricate design of brilliant color, with an arabesque of men and beasts and flowers on his skin. Filled with emotion, Parker had felt a particular reverse, as if a blind boy had been turned so gently in a different direction he didn't know his destination had been changed. Over his short lifetime, he had gotten tattoo after tattoo in an effort to achieve this patterned wholeness. But the efforts were something haphazard and botched, and left Parker generally dissatisfied and always seeking one more tattoo. He was married to Sarah Ruth, a plain woman who knew God only as spirit. The narrator describes her this way. The skin on her face was thin and drawn as tight as the skin on an onion, and her eyes were gray and sharp like the points of an ice pick. In addition to her other bad qualities, she was forever sniffing up sin. Parker could never please her. In addition, he worked on an old woman's farm, and one day, while baling hay in a field, making circles around the tree in the middle, Parker felt the tree reach out to grab him. The tractor crashed upside down, and Parker landed with a thud on his back, yelling, "God above!" The tree burst into flames, and Parker's shoes were flung asunder, burning as well. Parker crawled back to his truck and drove 50 miles to the city. Parker did not allow himself to think on the way to the city. He only knew that there had been a great change in his life, a leap forward into a worse unknown, and that there was nothing he could do about it. This incident of the burning tree clearly evokes the image of God's confrontation with Moses in the burning bush in the desert. God told Moses to remove his shoes because he stood on holy ground, and then to return to Egypt with the mission to free the Hebrews. N.T. Wright, in his book Simply Christian, comments on that Old Testament incident. His comments on that Old Testament incident seem appropriate here. He claims that while God belongs in heaven and we on earth, the incident of the burning bush and others like it show again and again that the two spheres overlap and heaven and earth intersect, for the moment at least. This is the loving Creator acting within creation to show signs of His presence, unquote. Parker knows that it is time for another tattoo, but this one will be something different from the chaotic array on his body. He goes immediately to the tattoo parlor in the city to request the design book and his request for a picture of God to put on his empty back. He flips through the book, waiting for a sign. And he turns the page and waiting for a sign, and he rejoiced the distorted images of Christ as well as the sentimental ones. After he turns the page, a silent "go back" forces him to return and choose the image of a haloed head of a flat, stern, Byzantine Christ with all-demanding eyes. What Parker chooses here is the Pantocrator. The oldest known image of Christ celebrated by Greek Christians. This version of the Pantocrator, found in St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, dates from the 6th century. The title, Pantocrator, is the Greek translation of all-powerful and depicts the dual nature of Christ, both fully human and fully divine. He holds the gospel in his left hand, and his right hand is lifted in blessing or teaching. Some critics suggest that one eye is stern and suggests God's judgment, and the other kind to represent mercy. Frankly, I don't see that, but that's what they say. After Parker receives his tattoo, he believes that the eyes were now forever on his back, and they were eyes to be obeyed. He drives out of the city and into the country night. His head was almost clear, and he observed that his dissatisfaction was gone. But he felt not quite like himself. It was as if he were himself, but a stranger to himself. Driving into a new country, though, everything he saw was familiar to him, even at night. He returns home to Sarah Ruth, and he feels light pouring through him, turning his spiderweb soul into a perfect arabesque of colors, a garden of trees and birds and beasts. He is eager to please his wife and show her his tattoo. It will surely win her over. But when Sarah Ruth looks at his back, she claims, "It ain't anybody I know," and she calls him a idolater, and beats him on the back with his broom until he has welts. And then he runs from the house to the pecan tree in the yard. There we leave Parker, leaning against the tree, crying like a baby. End of story. This pathetic image of Parker suggests a man who's punished for bearing the image of Christ and fully aware of the burden and the blessing. As Flannery explains, the image of the icon on his back with its straight, all-demanding eyes leads Parker's own vision inward. He begins to examine his own soul. Whether this examination leads to the fullness of joy promised by that light pouring through him and the garden of trees and birds and beasts, we are not informed by the story. We can only hope that this sobbing man, who is permanently marked by the Christ on his back, will come to wholeness by and by. I want to close with one last image from O'Connor, quite apart from any that we've examined, and one that I think would appeal to Hopkins as well. This one comes from her short story, The Displaced Person. This story features a widow managing a farm left by her husband, who cares for nothing but her position and her reputation and her money. She employs a family of German exiles, displaced persons, to work on her farm. The father of this family is run over by a tractor in full view of everybody on the farm, and no one tries to help him. The one redeeming image in this story is the peacock that runs freely around the farm. A Catholic priest comes to visit Mrs. McIntyre, this woman, and it's the only Catholic priest in all of her stories. He comes from time to time and notices this peacock. "So beautiful," the priest said. "A tail full of suns." Mrs. McIntyre responds acidly, "Nothing but a pea chicken." Later, when the priest visits again, he sees the bird, and here's the image. Raise its tail and spread it with a shimmering, timbrous noise. Tears of small, pregnant suns floated in a green-gold haze over his head. The priest stood transfixed, his jaw slack. "Christ will come like that," he said in a loud, gay voice. "The transfiguration." Because the peacock sheds its feathers annually and grows new, brighter ones, it has become a Christian symbol of immortality. And the multitude of eyes in its tail suggests an all-seeing God. This lovely image from the natural world slips into O'Connor's fiction, I think almost unwittingly, but it's a lovely one on which to close. So finally, Gerard Manley Hopkins drew from the Old Testament poets and prophets for his beautiful and classical images as grace bearers that lead to faith. In an odd sort of way, Flannery O'Connor's images seem more in touch with the New Testament and the Incarnation in making her grace bearers outsiders, the kinds of people Jesus was drawn to. Jesus' greatest challenges were directed towards the religious establishment, the self-righteous and rule-bound Pharisees, and his attention was focused more on ones the church and society found unworthy and unattractive. Jesus sought out the lame, the sick, the leprous, the blind, the prodigal, all freakish people, and drew them into the kingdom. N.T. Wright goes so far as to say this about such outsiders: "There's a party going on with all the wrong people attending it. God's kingdom is happening under your noses, and you can't see it." We know that the figures and images of the natural world and the human world, both beautiful and ugly, are at best only an echo of the voice of God calling people into this kingdom, not the voice itself. But if we pay attention, they might call us out of ourselves and appeal to a deeper knowledge within us of the life of the Spirit. They can point away from the present world to a different one altogether as signposts to a larger beauty, a larger truth. Thank you.